Morning Church, as we reach our midway point of this week, I want to encourage you to take a look at this past week so far and reflect and ponder upon how much time you spent with Jesus, whether that be through your prayers, through reading the Word, singing songs of praise, or even just thinking about Him as you go for a walk or do your everyday tasks. Whatever it may be, I pray that you can continue to be intentional in your walk with Him. With that, let's begin. As we grow up, there are things that we get used to. It just becomes a part of life. The restaurants we eat at, the places we get our regular fixing of boba, the places we hang out, or the school or the church that we attend. And maybe because they've been so a part of our lives, we don't really think about it too much. It's just always there. But as you know, with time and circumstances, things can change. People come and go. The places we used to enjoy are just not the same. Some businesses go out of business and shut down, and things just change. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this, especially with the pandemic that we're in. Now, whenever I go back to Alaska to visit family, there are two things that really interest me. One, how much things have not changed, and two, how much things have changed. I remember the last time I went back home to Alaska. I remember landing in the airport and looking at the terminal and looking at the airport and thinking to myself, wow, it looks like the same, right? Granted, there were a few new things like new shops and new restaurants that I hadn't seen before, but for the most part, it was the same. And then after being picked up and going down the street away from the airport and the street that I used to drive on all the time as a teenager and as an adult, I couldn't help but notice that there were a lot of things that were the same. Right? The bumps on the road, the buildings, the businesses, things were the same. But when I'm in Alaska, at times I feel like it's the good old days, right? Things are the way that they used to be. Things haven't changed. But then part of me also feels like I'm a tourist because there's a lot of new things that I'm just not familiar with. And it can feel a little awkward, and sometimes I think to myself, man, I wish things had never changed. And for some of you, maybe some of you younger ones, when you get older and eventually go off to college, and maybe after a long time in studies and you come back, you'll feel the same way I felt, right? It'll look a little different. Some things will be the same, but many things may be different. You'll reminisce and you'll think of when it used to be the way that it was. Now, it isn't to say that change is bad. I think change is great. It definitely is. Change can bring about a lot of good things that benefit both of us. But in the midst of all the change, having something constant that we can go back to is really a great thing too. And that's one thing I think about whenever I go and visit home. Yeah, the streets might look different, buildings may be different, restaurants, schools, church may look different, but there are things that stay constant. And one of those huge constants is family, right? My family will always be my family. And it's a good reassurance to know that family will always be there. And there's a saying that people use, and typically it's more in a romantic way, but it goes like this: I loved you yesterday, I love you still, I always have, and I always will. Or, I love you more today than yesterday, but not as much as tomorrow. I know, it's cheesy, but I'm a cheesy kind of guy. But anyways, this idea is that there is something constant, right? There's something changing. And in the quotes that I shared, it's love. Something that will be the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Today, we conclude with the book of Hebrews, and we're looking at Hebrews chapter 13. This is the closer. Hebrew wraps everything together, and he isn't really sharing anything drastically new or anything like that. It's really a review. And of course, in order to understand this chapter and the verse that we're going to be looking at specifically, it's important to remember the whole purpose and the bigger picture of the book of Hebrews. Hebrews wanted Christians to know that Jesus was the real deal, and the life with him is totally worth it. Don't forget that. Now, the easiest way to look at chapter 13 is to see it in three parts. The first 6 verses talk about some general instructions to Christians. Then in verse 7 to 19, we find this thing that I like to call a community leader sandwich. Basically, he's saying a few things that he wants Christians to know about their relationship with the leaders that they have. And then he has this little appeal for a prayer. And then the last part of the chapter is really just a closing, farewell, last remarks, and a few announcements, and that's basically it. But today, I want to look at a verse that a lot of people sometimes find as kind of out of place. Typically, it's used a lot out of the context in which it's found in. And I want to be clear that it's not to say that this verse outside of the context of Hebrews shouldn't be used. I think we should definitely use it, and it's very applicable to many different things. But I want you to know what the context is and why Hebrews is saying this, so that it gives more meaning to when we do use it outside of its context. Look at Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7 to 8. It says, "Remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever." So Hebrews is pleading with Christians. Remember your leaders. He's also saying a very similar thing in verse 17, and this is why I call it a little community leader sandwich. Now, remember chapter 11, this hall of faith with these other leaders that were part of their faith. And Hebrew makes it clear, strive to have a faith like these people as well. And then verse 8, which is the verse that I want to focus in on, you maybe memorized it and used it yourself, Hebrew has this kind of side thought and throws it in there. And you might think it's random, but understand, Hebrews is writing to a group of Christians who clearly struggled with two things, right? Is Jesus the real deal? And is a life with Jesus worth it? And that's why Hebrews is writing this letter in the first place. And so he kind of throws that in there because he knows that these Christians were struggling. It's like, remember everything that I've talked about in this letter? I've shared with you all of this evidence, all of the facts. I've showed you all of this, so what more can I share with you now? Jesus has been the real deal to these teachers, to the leaders, to the fathers of faith. And it's the same Jesus that will be real to us, to our communities, even to this day. Circumstances and perspectives, situations and scenarios will change, but Jesus Christ and his gospel will not. You see, the work of Jesus yesterday, the sacrificial and atoning work of our high priest, Hebrew talked about that over and over and over again. And then today, right, Jesus' works continue as he continues to be our representative, our high priest. He intercedes for us at the right hand of God. And guess what? Forever, tomorrow, Jesus will continue to do the same. While things in this world may change, instead of running after things that may come and go, let's continue to hold on and run back to the most constant thing in our lives. So church, remember this. This world will change, but Jesus will be the same, yesterday, today, and forever.